Hello everybody, Michael the Librarian of Magic here, finding and cataloging the magical and pointing you to it. Today I am fully caught up on all of the episode 2s, or the second installment of the Disney original content. Disney threw me a little bit of a curveball on this one. I was among the people who were unaware that they would be then releasing after their big launch last Tuesday, the 12th, that they would be releasing all of the next episodes of all the content on Friday, this last Friday, in order to sort of reset the weekly release schedule for every Friday rather than every Tuesday. So for me, that was a little bit of a curveball. I kind of had to readjust some plans and schedule or scramble over the weekend to get the content viewed to a certain extent. I mean, it didn't throw me off too badly. I didn't have to rearrange too much. Um, but I was able to get all of that done by the end of the weekend. So here we are on Monday, and I am ready to give my thoughts and reactions to all of the new episodes. So I'm just going to dive straight into that and talk about all of the new things. I will say also, just like last week, I will be giving The Mandalorian its own episode. So from here on out, if you're following these videos, you should probably just get used to having a separate video for The Mandalorian. I feel like there's probably more to talk about there than will fit in this episode. It'll keep this recap episode from getting too overly bloated. Okay, with that out of the way, I'm just going to jump straight into my notes here, my handy notebook. In this week's installment of High School Musical, the series, I didn't talk a ton about the plot last week, so much as I talked about the overall feeling of the show and what I thought of it in general. So let me see if I can run through just a synopsis off the top of my head to get all this up to speed and see if it all makes sense. So the show really centers around a young couple called Ricky and Nini. And Ricky and Nini are an item at the very beginning of the show. In the first episode, they are starting to get a lot closer to each other. They've been dating for almost a year. In their nearly 1 year during their nearly 1 year anniversary, Nini makes a special video with a original song that she has written for Ricky, in which during the lyrics of the song, she unveils to him that she loves him. She says the L word. Ricky, totally chickening out about his actual feelings, freaks out when he can't say it back, which is a common plot in shows like these. And instead of confessing his actual feelings, he, does a knee jerk in the other direction and says, "Summer's coming up. Maybe we should go on a little bit of a break just to examine how we feel, because we're not going to be around each other that much this summer." Blah blah blah. If anybody's ever seen the show Friends, you all know that the concept of the break usually doesn't work out in anybody's favor, and this case is no different. Nini goes off very annoyed that she, bore her heart and soul and nothing was reciprocated. In fact, her boyfriend essentially broke up with her. And she ends up dating another person over the summer at a camp. And when they get back to school during the fall semester, to Ricky's dismay, he finds that Nini has been dating the school's water polo captain, EJ. And he's this super handsome, hunky jock type that Ricky is very threatened by. Ricky, sort of an aloof skater guy with not a lot of interest or direction, other than he still has feelings for Nini and wants to confess that he does love her, but he just didn't know how to say so in the first place, and just freaked out about it. But she's dating EJ now, so things are complicated. At the end of the first episode, there are tryouts for the new High School Musical. I had mentioned that in the other video about this. EJ and Nini try out for the lead roles of Troy and Gabriella. Nini is up against this girl called Gina, who is a transfer student from another school. She's new at the school, but she's like a super theater maven girl who has been, when in her other schools, has been cast as the lead in every performance that she's ever been a part of, and she's like super amazing dancer and singer and all that stuff, and she's competing with Nini for the lead role of Gabriella. EJ is trying out for Troy, and in order to try to impress Nini and win her affections back, Ricky also tries out for the role of Troy. After they go through their auditions, to the surprise of even the director of the show and the choreography guy, who is a character called Carlos, who's a really funny sort of comedy relief. Nene and Ricky actually win out the lead roles of Troy and Gabriella. Surprise, surprise. EJ ends up getting cast as Chad, who is like the friend of Troy in High School the Musical. And that's sort of the end of the first episode. Gina gets beat out and she's all disgruntled. In the second episode, which is called The Read Through, basically they're reading through the script for the first time and problems arise. Ricky is not very good at the choreography straight out the gate, and Nene chews him out, thinking, look, you're not taking this seriously. You just tried to sign up for this so you could be near me and try to, I'm dating EJ now. Stop trying to drive a wedge between us, blah, blah, blah. And he says, fine, I'm just going to quit. I don't want to stand in your way. He gets all mad about it. It says that he's going to quit. And then Gina and EJ have this sort of contrived plan where they sort of figure out that they want the same goals, or similar goals. EJ realizes that if Ricky quits the show, then he can play the role of Troy. He would be sort of the next in line for it, and then he and Nene would have the roles the way that they wanted to. Gina realizes that if Ricky stays on the show and causes friction, then Nene might not want to be involved. So she wants Nene to get to leave the show so that she can have the role of Gabriella. So they are sort of... Gina convinces EJ that they want the same thing, even though they don't. And so they're sort of working together to mess up the original casting. There's other fun stuff along the way. The other characters that are cast in the play have some song. There's one girl who's cast in one of the roles as one of the teachers in the show. She has to write an original song as the music person, and she unveils that in this episode, and it's a really cool song. She does a really good job singing it. There's other funny side stuff that's interesting. The role of Sharpay, the sort of catty girl from the original movie. There's a boy named Seb who gets cast as Sharpay. That's just the role he really wants to do, and he has sort of the right attitude for it, so they cast him as it, and he's really fun. It's really funny to see him sort of pick up that mantle and go with it. So there's really funny stuff. Most of it centers around just the read-through. The character who plays Miss Jen, the director who was once in the background dancer in High School Musical, continues to be really funny and takes her job of putting on this musical way too seriously. And it's just really humorous and meta, and that's the best part about the show. The teen love romance, quadrangle romance. I mean, it's not bad by any means, but it's pretty standard stuff for these kind of shows. I mean, we all kind of know how this is going to go in the end, don't we? But it's interesting to see how it all comes together and see how they have their ups and downs, just like any other rom-com. And hopefully they'll end up together in the end, and that would be really sweet if they can figure out they clearly still have feelings for each other, and that EJ and Gina aren't the greatest people, and so on and so on. And hopefully also put on a great show of High School Musical. That's also partially what this is about, to figure out how to do that and become better singers and dancers and all that. So it's a fun show. It's very, surface level stuff, but it is enjoyable. It's actually pretty funny. And like I said in the last episode, the singing and dancing talent is really good in this show. So that's this week's episode, the read-through of High School Musical, the series. In the Imagineering story, the second episode of that was called What Would Walt Do? And basically picks up after the first sort of episode or segment of this documentary left off after the death of Walt Disney, and sort of deals with the fallout of the Imagineering department and the entire Disney company after Walt died. It deals with the legacy of Walt's brother Roy, who had to take over and make a lot of decisions for the company after Walt passed away. And it also talks about some of the attractions that Walt had planned on for a long period of time that weren't able to get off the ground until after Walt was gone, like the Haunted Mansion. It talks about Ewell Gracie, who helped design a lot of the effects and stuff in the Haunted Mansion. There was some cool stuff about that I didn't know, and maybe a lot of other Disney nerds probably did know a lot more than I did on that particular aspect. So that was really interesting to me. I didn't know that Yul Gracie was a magician, and that's one of the reasons why there's so many cool illusions and things like that in the Haunted Mansion, because one of the principal people that was Imagineering the whole thing like developed magical illusions for a living. So that's really cool. They also, the heart of the episode, that's really only in the beginning. The heart of the hour long episode is really um, details the pressure that the Imagineering department and the Disney company in general was under as they tried to execute the plans and ultimately building of Epcot and Tokyo Disney at the same time in the early 80s, which made them run very thin of talent and Imagineers and all that sort of stuff. But they were able to miraculously pull that off. And it was a sort of an interesting time where everything was up in the air and sort of a difficult challenge for the company. They also ended up going through CEO leadership changes in the middle there, and this episode of the documentary details all of that. Is all very interesting. An interesting uh, episode of the Imagineering story, and it's sort of, I keep hesitating to say it's an episode because it does sort of feel like it's all just sort of one big piece, almost like a Ken Burns style documentary that is unveiled in installments, or like Planet Earth or something like that, where it's really one big piece. And this one was really interesting. It was interesting to see exactly how everybody felt or what they thought after Walt passed away, and how that sort of left a vacuum in all of the creative departments. And that made this episode in some ways a little bit more interesting to me than the first episode, because a lot of Walt's leadership style made sense when he was still alive, and there were a lot of things in this episode I didn't know, like about how they made Tokyo Disney and how that came about. Those are things I personally knew a little bit less about. So this is a very interesting episode, the Imagineering story. The episode this week of Encore was highlighting the cast of a production of Beauty and the Beast from 2007 at a high school near Fort Worth, Texas, called Saginaw High, and they're bringing those people all back together after what I guess that was 12 years to put on a production of Beauty and the Beast. One of the things that made this stand out a little bit more to me than the first episode is that Beauty and the Beast is a much more involved stage production than Annie. So there were a lot more effects and stagecraft needed to pull this off, and the production team of Encore and Disney and all the people who put this particular show together sort of did all that. They had set designs and decorators, and they hired this. Beauty and the Beast requires a bunch of extra background extras and stingers and stuff, and so they had all these other Broadway actors come in. It's just a much bigger show than Annie, but they really kind of put some like money and effort into it, designing the sets and all of that stuff, and it looked leaps and bounds better in terms of production value than it did when they executed it at their school in 2007. Whereas the Annie one looked better in terms of costuming and all that stuff. They definitely improved it from the original, but they didn't sort of go all out with it. Most of the people who were in the original cast of that one in the first episode were pretty much all the people they needed to pull that show off, whereas this one they had all kinds of Broadway talent and stuff like that were helping them out, that were involved in the background. And this one also had a few more moments of drama with some of the people that were involved in this, and there's some interesting personal things going on in this one that weren't. Most of the people in the first episode kind of got along with each other even years later a little bit differently than the people in this episode. There are some differences there, so it was very interesting to watch. Beauty and the Beast is a cool show, and so it was interesting to see them pull that off, and to be familiar with those roles and all that stuff. It's just interesting to see. I personally am really enjoying this show. It has a lot of moments of heart and a lot of moments of tension and things that you would really understand if you are a music person or a theater person in school, I think you're really going to respond to this if you were. And even if you weren't, like I said in the other video I made, you may still be interested just in the aspect that they're putting this thing on in 5 days' time. And even if you don't know anything about what that feels like or what that would take, it is interesting to see it. I mean, anybody approaching this who doesn't have any experience with theater would know 5 days is nothing to get yourself back into shape when you haven't been doing singing and dancing for 12 years. And you've got, a lot of the people that are involved in this have been like, they've had kids and they've got little kids at home and they're trying to manage all this stuff. And then on top of that, they're trying to figure out how to do a musical in 5 days. So anyway, it continues to be a really interesting show, and have some really good moments. And this episode I enjoyed a little bit more than the other one, not because I think that the cast did any worse job or anything like that, but because seeing a cast pull off Beauty and the Beast was a little bit more interesting to me than Annie, because there's a little bit more from a theatrical point of view that goes into that. So that was just for me. So that was Encore. This week in the world, according to Jeff Goldblum, he went and investigated the world of ice cream and did a bunch of things. He talked about the biology of why we like sweet things and the chemistry of how ice cream works and why we respond to it. He went to a like 50s culture and car show thing in Las Vegas where they have like an old school ice cream truck, and he rode around in it and helped give people some ice cream. Gave the history of ice cream a little bit. He went up to the Ben & Jerry's mothership in Vermont to visit with Ben and Jerry. And that was where I learned an interesting tidbit that for whatever reason I never knew before, which was that one of the reasons why Ben & Jerry's ice cream is so flavorful and arguably so successful, and why there's so many like chunks of things in a pint of Ben & Jerry's, is because apparently Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry has what's called anosmia, which is like a loss of the sense of smell, and as a result, the sense of taste. They're intertwined. And he doesn't have total anosmia, but he has a pretty hefty case of it, to the point where when he was helping taste the product when they were getting going, they would just keep putting in more and more stuff, more and more flavor until he could actually taste it. And then once he did, that was the product they used. And so it's like super flavorful to the rest of us because it takes so much flavor for Ben to be able to even taste anything. And I never knew that. I thought that was really interesting. And then finally, an interesting aspect in this episode, Jeff Goldblum goes to a place in Oregon called Salt and Straw that makes really unique, weird flavors of ice cream, things that have crickets and mealworms in them, or bone marrow. There was one they made with pig's blood, and this guy that runs this place is willing to look for anything that has a potentially interesting flavor profile to make ice cream with. And they make a unique Jeff Goldblum flavor. He crafts his own custom flavor, which they like go walking in the forest in Oregon and get like greens and stuff that naturally grow in the forest and some kind of flowers and things, and they make an ice cream out of it, like a Jeff Goldblum flavor ice cream. And then Jeff Goldblum takes it to debut his flavor. He takes it onto an aircraft carrier off the coast where the Navy is having an ice cream social, which is a traditional thing that goes way back, 50, 60 years or more. On these aircraft carriers, the Navy puts on social ice cream socials as a morale boost. So Jeff Goldblum goes to host one of these. He goes to hang out on an aircraft carrier and serve these sailors his custom flavor and get their opinions on it. And it's sort of really funny. And as always, Jeff Goldblum is just at his weirdest and best in this show, and the way that people react to him is just so great. And I'm really enjoying this show just to see where he goes next and what he learns, and his enthusiasm is infectious to me, and this is a show that I'm really enjoying. So The World According to Jeff Goldblum. There was no new episode of Pixar in Real Life this week for whatever reason. I just didn't see one drop. I checked a few times and still just the Inside Out console in the park. So we'll see what they do. I'll update on that as soon as maybe on Friday, that's when they'll do a new one. I'm not sure. Disney Family Sundays, the DIY craft show. This week they had a short video on how to craft your own for kids, but I suppose you could use the same materials to make one as an adult. I don't see why. To craft your own Little Mermaid mermaid tail blanket that goes up on your feet to make you look like a mermaid, and there's a little tail flipper, and you make custom scales out of felt and glue and stuff. It had the Cheney family, which was a mom and a dad and two daughters, and they made the two little girls the mermaid tail blanket. So that was an interesting craft. If that's something you think you or your family would be interested in, you may check that out to make some custom mermaid tail blankets. The episodes, as always, tell you all of the materials that you will need to replicate the craft, so that's pretty cool. In this week in Forky Asks a Question, Forky wants to know, what is a friend? And in order to help him answer that question, Ham helps out a little bit once again, but mostly he figures out himself what a friend is by chatting with his friend, a totally inanimate ceramic smiley face mug. And it's a really funny episode. These are both the Forky Asks Questions have been just really funny shorts. Tony Hale is really funny, and the scripts for these are very highly amusing. There's a lot of funny like language gags, and Forky's like perfect for these. And this one I just really loved. I actually like this even more than the What Is Money one. I was laughing out loud the whole time. If you want to see Forky have some interesting interactions with an inanimate smiley face mug, check out What Is a Friend on this week's Forky Asks a Question. The Marvel Hero Project I really enjoyed this week. It was an episode about a young lad named Elijah Lee, the incredible Elijah, who lives in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. And he's a really inspiring young individual. He has, at a very young age, at the age of 11 years old, has become an advocate for child abuse victims. He himself was never a victim of child abuse. He lives in a really great, well-adjusted home, although he did lose his father at a very young age, and his mom is a single mother. His dad had a heart attack when he was, I think, 3 or 4 years old. But he, has been raised well by both of his parents, and is fortunately never the victim of abuse, but he knew some kids in school that were, and as a result feels very strongly about the injustice of kids not having a voice and being victims of abuse, and has become a really strong advocate in his community for speaking up for victims of child abuse, and just becoming an advocate for those kids who he feels like don't have a voice, and he's 100% right. He's just a very impressive, civic-minded kid. He is, even at the age of 11, he is a fully ordained minister and preacher in his church. So there are a couple segments in there where they show him sermonizing in his church, and that's really interesting to see and very inspiring at how passionate and well-spoken he is. And then sort of the meat of the show is that he organizes a march in his town to march against child abuse and in support of child abuse victims. And he takes his inspiration from Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr. And I think that this was just an episode that resonated with me because Dr. King is a hero of mine, and the imagery and passion of this young man and the way that evokes Dr. King was very inspiring to me. There's a segment in the end where the kid he thinks he's going to, when Marvel, so just like in the last episode, Marvel is drawing a comic of him to commemorate him as a hero and inaugurate him into the Hero Project team, give him his own custom jacket and all the stuff like they did in the last episode. And they're going to unveil it to him as he's supposed to be going up to Washington, D.C. to give a lecture or a talk to a sister school, like a private school up there in D.C. that's a sister school with his school, if I remember correctly. And he's supposed to be going to the school to give a talk. That's what he thinks he's supposed to be doing, and little does he know that they have it organized so that the kids from the school will be meeting him at the Lincoln Memorial, and he gives his speech to them from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial the same way that Dr. King was able to do when he gave his I Have a Dream speech. And you see footage of this kid giving his speech there, and it to me was extremely powerful, being that Dr. King's a hero of mine, and having stood on those steps myself, and reading. I read the I Have a Dream speech the last time I was there on those stairs, and it was a very powerful moment for me. So it brought up those great memories and evoked just the things I love the most about Dr. Martin Luther King, and it really helped this show in general coalesce for me more than it was last week. I was kind of not fully getting the grasp of it, and this episode really locked in the notion of it for me, which is not just that Marvel is sort of highlighting these kids and inaugurating them into the Hero Project because they're doing heroic things. Both of the kids, Jordan Reeves and Elijah Lee, that have been featured in both of these episodes, and they certainly are. They're both amazing human beings. But to me, it's really about showing kids who are inspiring the way for the future. And this episode really locked it in for me as just being about highlighting that as a message of hope, the way that comic book heroes are. That we have hope that there are people out there that are doing great things. I mean, that's what heroes are, and the way that they show you that these kids are real, honest, living heroes, and that they're and the fact that they're kids, I think the point of this show is really to just give you hope for the future, and it's really successful at doing that. I feel incredibly hopeful about the next generation, knowing that people like Elijah Lee and Jordan Reeves are out there and doing what they're doing for people, and people, giving voices to young people, and being advocates for people with disabilities or young people who don't have voices, and all the things that they're doing. Really impressive people. It was extremely heartfelt and well done episode, and reflexively made the other episode lock in for me, and even greater by comparison. So now I'm really excited to see the whole rest of the series, and just to let it stand there as something to be able to watch once in a while and be inspired by what's going on in the future. So Marvel Hero Project, really great this week. Elijah Lee, you are awesome, and I'm so glad that you are in our future. There were no new Spark shorts at all. I wasn't necessarily expecting there to be, but I just, like I said, I just have the feeling that they might be adding to those over time. So I'll be sure to let know when or if they ever do that, or if I hear anything about it. But this week, just the original 4 films that were there from last time. I think that's pretty much all of the new episodes of things that were out this week. There will be new stuff, like I said, with the I'll be sorry, I don't know what I'm talking about. There's going to be an episode separate from this with The Mandalorian, because I did watch the episode of that as well. And then there will be new stuff on Friday. I had all that jumbled in my head. So when everything comes out on Friday, then I'll watch the new content and try to get out a reaction to it as quickly as is possible for me. But life gets in the way, and I'll try to do what I can. But expect after this, probably tomorrow, a video on my reactions of episode 2 of The Mandalorian. And until then, thank you as always for watching. Thank you for commenting, subscribing, and giving me a thumbs up down below. If you have been watching these shows, let me know what you think. If there are any ones of these that have been your favorites, or if, you haven't been watching them at all, that's okay. But anyway, thanks for watching these. I hope they've been entertaining and informative. And until next time, I hope you have a really excellent day. Bye-bye.